Previously on Storytime, for the last few weeks we've been doing a story called Search and Rescue by Kerry Hammond. And it's all witness testimony, often first person, from a search and rescue officer in a carefully unnamed American national park. And as the story goes on, three things become apparent. Nothing is going well in this park. There are predatory pockets of time and space which things emerge from. Pockets which seem to be defined by stairs, just appearing in the middle of nowhere. Stairs which have been there for so long that the search and rescue officers, when they are trained, are ordered to never talk about them or go up them. And it doesn't take. And as the story finished, there was a very clear implication that whatever is happening out in the wilds is beginning to accelerate. Now, Kerry Hammond actually sold this story to Channel Zero, which was the 4-season-long, actually rather good, Sci-Fi Channel creepypasta anthology show. The only problem is that the season based on Search and Rescue, which is season 3, called Butcher's Block, is incredibly loosely based on Search and Rescue. They went in a very, very different direction, and Kerry, because she sold the rights, had to let it go. Which makes what we're doing today kind of interesting, because there are 5 flash pieces which hit after Search and Rescue finished.
You need to define what flash is.
Flash fiction is fiction up to 1,000 words long, unless you're me, in which case it's fiction up to 1,500 words long, with the first 0 very hurriedly drawn in place over the 5 with a Sharpie, because that counts.
They're under 2,000-ish word stories.
There we are. So basically, Greg Van Eekhout, who's a really, really good author, whose book Cog is the best middle-grade cyberpunk Blade Runner-esque anti-capitalist adventure with a robotic dog I've ever read. Brilliantly described flash fiction stories as story grenades. You throw them in a room, they go bang, they tell a story, and they're done. It's basically that. So we have 5 of those, which orbit Search and Rescue in a really, really interesting way.
And they're all by Kerry.
And they are all by Kerry. Now, there are, of course, content warnings. Those of you who've been with us the last few weeks will know that these things get dark. And this one is these 5 stories are absolutely no exception. In particular, content warnings this week for claustrophobia, implied child threats, violence and death, and body horror. So, say what?
Don't forget water, meds, yada yada.
I was getting to that.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good.
Interrupting the flow. Please excuse me.
So, not at all. So, before we get started, 3 things. If you don't have any, get some water or a drink. If you have meds you need to take, please take them. If you need to eat a food, eat a food. I'm seeing someone's cat boys are not fed in the chat. Please attend to your cat and dog, boys and girls, and others as needed as well.
The bedroom door is closed.
The bedroom door is closed. We have confirmed that. The suave lumberjack cat boy will not be amongst us today. Yeah. I think we should get to it. I'm even on the right camera too. This is brilliant.
Well done.
Thank you. I'm quite proud of me.
Ooh, I like that Haven Lenny has a designated stream snack.
That's really good.
I want a stream snack.
I'll get one while I'm
I
reading.
don't have any stream snacks.
Go.
I'm going to have to remember that for next week.
Okay.
Stream snacks.
Stream snacks. Making a note, checking it twice.
Hashtag stream snacks.
The Tunnel by Kerry Hammond. Content warning, claustrophobia, implied child death. Hey guys! To celebrate my new Tumblr reaching almost 900 followers, I figured I'd go ahead and put down a story that I won't share on Reddit to thank all of you. I have a close friend who grew up in the area I did, so we have some similar memories of the woods and going out in them. He used to tell a story when we were kids that I never believed, because, well, he was pretty infamous for making shit up, but I've been reflecting more on it as I've been writing these other ones. When he was about 12, he belonged to a Boy Scout troop, and they went out to a campsite for a weekend retreat, or whatever you call those things. As I recall, he said it was him and about 12 other kids. He and like 3 others decided that after everyone had fallen asleep, they'd all get up and go fuck around in the forest, try and see which one of them would wimp out first. They ended up waking up one other kid on accident, and obviously he wanted to go with them. So they all headed out pretty late at night. He said he didn't know exactly how late because he didn't think to check the time, but he estimated that it was a little after midnight. Only one of them brought a flashlight, so they stayed pretty close together. Now, they got out far enough that they weren't afraid of waking anyone up, and they're horsing around and messing with each other and trying to spook everybody. And my friend said it was actually really fun, until one of the kids pointed ahead and said that he saw something. They followed, and he led them to what looked like an old, big fire pit. The kid was standing over it, looking into the centre of it, and he asked for the flashlight. Everyone gathered around, and my friend said it was the strangest thing. He said it almost looked like one of those old Warner Brothers cartoons, where there's an almost perfect circle made of solid black on the ground. He said he actually bent down to touch it and see if it really was just paper, but his hand went right down into the ground. When they lit up with the flashlight, they could see that it was, in fact, an almost perfect circular tunnel into the earth, with crude dirt steps carved into the sides, spiralling down. Now, the pit itself was about 5 feet wide, and the circle was almost exactly that, so it was plenty large enough for a small boy to go down into it. They did the typical things, yelling into it, dropping a few rocks to see if they could hear it land, but they couldn't see or hear where it ended, so the talk turned to electing a kid to go down. My friend begged out of it, and he got ragged on, but he said it just didn't seem right, and he didn't think any of them should be going down there. But the kid with the flashlight, who was sort of the unofficial leader, gave my friend the flashlight and said he was going to check it out. He climbed down into it and started following the stairs, which spiraled along the sides and down in a steep twist. He said once he got down far enough, he'd call for the flashlight, and my friend would toss it down. Which is stupid, I know, but maybe the kid wanted to prove he wasn't scared. They watched him go down, they kept the light on him the whole time, and then they couldn't see him anymore. Eventually they could barely hear him, and my friend started to ask him whether he was going to come back up, or when he was going to come back up, and they said the last thing they heard him say was something to the effect of, "It's just going and going." And then he vanished, and they couldn't see or hear him. Not knowing what to do, but also not wanting to follow him down, the rest of the group waited by the pit for hours for this kid to come back. It was late, and they were little boys, so at some point all of them fell asleep. When they woke up, it was daylight, and the circle was gone. I mean, gone. The ground was flat, like it had never even been there. They all panicked and dug down as far as they could, but there wasn't even a trace of the tunnel. My friend said it wasn't like a cave-in, it was like there'd never been anything there in the first place. Now, they rushed back to camp, where everyone was just starting to notice their collective absence, and told the counsellor what had happened. He didn't believe the whole bit about the weird tunnel, but he could see a kid was missing. So, he calls the police. The searches started. My friend and the rest of the remaining group led the searchers to the fire pit, and there was a massive excavation, and they never found anything. They searched the area for miles, investigated a lot of sex offenders in town in case it was an abduction, but they never found a single trace of that kid. Radio by Kerry, Hammond. I don't sleep. That is almost not an exaggeration. I average around 2 hours a night on a good night, and that's 2 hours of deep sleep, REM sleep, the kind that your body uses to fix itself. It's been getting worse for a while, but it'll go away eventually. It always has before. I just have to ride it out, keep my strings from unraveling until I can get myself glued back together. They say it's better for you to lie in bed the hours that you'd be asleep and just pretend, because it helps get the body's natural circadian rhythm back. So every night I lie in bed for 8 hours, and I spend 6 of them watching the man on the top of the radio tower. There is a window above my bed, and when I'm sleeping in it, I have to sit up to see out of it. I like to be aware of my surroundings, so I installed a mirror on the opposite wall to allow me to see out of it. I have blackout curtains to ensure that my sleep is as genuine as possible, but some nights I like to leave them open, watch the sky. Down the road from me is a radio tower. It's the largest thing on the horizon, and at the top is a little maintenance balcony. Now, the tower is close enough for me to see this balcony clearly. On this particular night, the blinds were cracked so that I could watch a storm approaching in the mirror, safe in bed. Heat lightning started to strobe across the sky, and it illuminated something moving on top of the tower. I sat up in bed, looked out the window, and on the top of the tower, on the little balcony, I could see the very small shape of a man waving something. He was moving his arms in strange rhythmic jerking patterns facing towards the storm. I'd never seen anyone on the tower before, and I couldn't think of a single reason that this man would have been there at midnight while the storm was coming. I called the police and they sent someone out, but at some point the man left. I don't know how I missed him. He didn't come back the next night or for weeks afterwards. I thought about him a lot, though, and I kept watch every night. Because something bothered me very deeply, and I thought of his strange jerking arms, and I thought of the things he'd been holding, and I wasn't sleeping anyway, so I invested in a pair of binoculars and I kept a vigil for him. Every single night. I didn't see him come up on the tower, but he was there as soon as it got dark. I'd already gotten my 2 hours of sleep, and now I was awake and ready. I grabbed the binoculars and I brought him into focus. He was an older white man in a casual jacket. He reminded me of every single cubicle worker I have ever seen. Nothing about him was remarkable, except the cloth he was waving, which was this just stunningly bright white. He stared vacantly out at the skyline and moved his arms in these odd, sharp movements. His mouth hung open, and even from here I could see he hadn't shaved in some time. He blinked occasionally, but most of the time he just stared, mouth open, looking at nothing. Even though I was watching him the whole time, I didn't see him leave. He went away again for almost 2 years. The insomnia faded, and I slept very soundly without the mirror, which I had thrown out not long after the last sighting. I wasn't afraid of seeing him again. I threw it out because I couldn't stop myself from waiting for him. I could not get the man out of my thoughts. I did research into the company that owned the tower, and I knew with concrete certainty that the man did not belong to anyone in the city. He was not employed by any government agency or department. So, what was he doing on the radio tower? My suspicions about him began to grow. I researched nearby airports. He didn't belong to them, or at least no one who looked like he did that night, but I felt certain that somewhere, someone would know him. I found his family in Topeka. The address on the missing persons report was still current. He had a wife and 4 children and was loving and loved very deeply. He had vanished on the way to his car one morning and hadn't been seen since. The night he came back, I was reading, pretending that I was choosing to stay up, and I saw the orange flag out of the corner of my eye. He was back, illuminated on the radio tower by the light of the moon. His orange flags stood out like beacons, and I grabbed my binoculars, my other hand gripping a pen. I waited until he reached the end of the message, and I started over again. He raised his arms as if to signal 10 on the clock. I wrote down the letter T. He held his arms straight out to the side, and the left crossed over to hip level. I wrote it down. Left at knee level, right raised above the shoulder, 5 till 3. Arms out at the sides, hands at knee and shoulder again. I wrote them all down. When he started over, I read the message. They're coming back again. Late Night by Kerry, Hammond. Content warning, heavily implied threat to children. Lately I haven't been sleeping much. There's a lot on my mind, and I've always been prone to insomnia anyway. The last few days it's been bad enough that I'm lucky if I get 2-3 hours tops. Last night was my Friday, and I had planned on staying up, but I hadn't planned on pulling an all-nighter. I'm working on a personal writing project, though, and I lost track of time. I took a break around 3 in the morning, got up to stretch and eat and shit, and I passed my living room on the way to the kitchen. Like a lot of people, I leave my TV on all the time in a low volume, because I like the background noise, you know? Silence can be just as toxic as cacophony. I live in a very small town, and the local news still has the traditional sign-off when the program ends for the night. An American flag waves while the anthem plays, and a message bids the viewers a good night. And after that, it's just a test pattern until 6, when the early guys come on. When I passed by, the anthem was just coming to an end, so I made a sandwich, and on the way back to the bedroom, I stopped to change the channel to something else, but the station wasn't playing its usual test pattern, and I sat down to see what was going on. Around here, the Forest Service puts out emergency broadcasts when someone goes missing, or there's an issue in the park. Our town is basically bordered on 3 sides by very dense woodland, so anything that happens in the park affects us almost immediately, and alerts are not uncommon. I wondered if someone had had an issue at one of the campgrounds, and I figured I might as well see what was going on before going back to work. If it was a major issue, they were going to call me in anyway. Might as well beat them to the punch. So I eat my sandwich and I mute the TV so I wouldn't have to listen to the tone, and whoever was running the alert, I realised, wasn't using a canned message, so the standard alert was still flashing. I found that odd. They shouldn't be running it so early. Generally, if a major issue comes up in the small hours, the tornado sirens are turned on and the cops will go door to door. It's a very small town, so that's not an impossible task. The only times in my memory that we've had to do this were when the tornado touched down outside the town limits, and last year, when a wildfire hopped the state border and was coming at us faster than anticipated. But I've never seen an alert run after about 10 at night, so it was strange to see an emergency alert now without hearing the sirens running in tandem. The standard screen flickered for a second, which usually signals the end of the tone and the beginning of the actual message, so I unmuted the TV, and I caught the tail end of the tone before it switched to the interval honk, or whatever that flat tone is called. A message appeared very briefly, and I didn't have time to see it, and you can't, of course, rewind emergency broadcasts. A second message popped up. Please be advised. Advised was spelt wrong. I laughed. Started to pull my phone out of my pocket for a screenshot. I knew the people in charge of the broadcast system, and they get hell about typos from the higher-ups, but before I could take a picture, the message disappeared and was replaced with a real-time one. Whoever was writing it was typing fast and inaccurately. And this is around when I started to get a little bit uneasy. Please, spelt wrong, do not contact emergency services, both words spelt wrong, or family members, members spelt wrong. We are spelt wrong, aware of the situation. The message disappeared, and there was a brief pause. I sent a text to a buddy of mine who also tends to stay up late and told him to turn on the news. A new message, pre-typed, appeared. Please ensure that all children are present before making a report. False reports are subject to the message cut off. Nothing from my buddy. I started scanning the news on my phone for any breaking stories, but I didn't see anything. The weather was calm, there were no fires. They can move. New message. My phone buzzed and I pulled up the text. My buddy was watching and was just as perplexed as I was, so I called him and we talked while we watched the alert. Call the police. You seeing this? My friend said. Fuck are they doing? Well, who's doing it too? It's not a drill. Doesn't say. Doesn't it say if it's just a test? We were both quiet while we read the new message. Make them run. If they can't go back inside and call 911, don't let kids see themselves. We don't know what happens. There's no way. This is a joke, dude. Someone's going to get fired. I couldn't tell if he was trying to make me laugh or himself. At the tree line, they get stuck and they run in place or they turn into something else. Please don't be afraid. They aren't your children. Your children are asleep. Both of us were very quiet. Please avoid going between levels of your house. Stay where you are. Your children are not outside. They are upstairs in bed. What do we do? My buddy asked. Don't go up your stairs, I guess. Then we both started laughing for some reason. We didn't stop until the next message appeared. Stay where you are. Your children are sleeping. They are asleep. Don't move. Just stay where you are. Please stop calling. Don't look outside. It's not them. Read the prompts and follow. We don't know what they are. Stop calling. Weapons are ineffective. They can't leave the trees. Stay where you are. They are not your children. Suddenly the broadcast ended and the test pattern came up. My body and I waited for a bit and then hung up. I turned the TV to another channel and I got up to look out the window. My property includes several acres of heavily wooded land, and I looked out in the backyard where the tree line is clearest. And at the edge of the trees, I saw what I think was a small boy. He was running in place, in a very slow, almost robotic way. I couldn't make out any details, but he seemed familiar. He continued to run in place, his legs moving in big, exaggerated arcs, his arms pumping. I looked down for a second to unlock the door, and when I looked up, he was gone. Like he'd never been there. I closed the door and locked it and moved to the bedroom. I made sure all the blinds were closed, and I did not get much more work done. I didn't work for the next 2 days, but this morning I texted my buddy to see what he's heard. He says only a few other people saw the broadcast, and the guys in charge are in deep water. As to whether or not the situation, whatever it was real, it seems no one is talking. But he says our park had an emergency meeting this morning. We've all been advised to keep an eye out for any unusual activity. They haven't specified what that activity might be. I doubt we'll ever learn anything, one way or another. But I think I'll keep my blinds closed at night, for now. Just glancing at the chat before we go on to the next one. Yes, that story is illegitimate. Well, I'm moving.
Everyone take a breath.
This next one is heavy. Be warned.
This is the claustrophobia one as well.
This is the body horror and implied child death.
Okay.
Anniversary by Kerry, Hammond. Content warning, body horror and implied child death. We know their names and their birthdays. We know who was missing teeth, who was afraid of the dark, who had bruises. We know who had a hair lip scar, who had a brother that died while being born. We know what they wanted to be when they grew up. We can fill books with what we know, but what we don't know are the only things that matter to us. We have retraced our steps and gone over every piece that we have, but in the end, it doesn't add up to anything, so all we can do is pull over it and try again and again to make it all go somewhere, lead to something, because nothing else is important. Not anymore. All that matters is what we don't have. Here's what we know. On June 21st, 1995, the local Cub Scout troop met at the south entrance of the National Park, which is located approximately 20 miles from town. They were led by 2 scoutmasters, Huxley and Anders. There were 18 boys in attendance, ranging from ages 7 to 10. For many of them, it was their first real camping trip. This is a small town, and most, if not all of them, knew each other, at least by name. Everyone had been given permission by their parents to go. Their uniforms would have been freshly cleaned, their packs new and still stiff on their shoulders. We can only imagine the cacophony of all those young boys running around in the picnic area. We bring this up because they were real, and people forget that. They were real. They were alive and you could touch them. They ran around and they had nightmares and they enjoyed ice creams. They were real children with real lives. The Scoutmasters got everyone together and took attendance. One witness remembers seeing them before they left on their own hike. They were by the tables, big group of them. Honestly, I was glad when they went the other way. Cute, but, didn't really want them on my back. Guess I don't feel like that now, though, but they seemed like they knew what they were doing. The group entered the forest around 8 in the morning, as best as we can figure. There aren't any cameras out there, of course, but based on their schedule, we feel confident that's an accurate figure. They took a trail that leads into the mountains about 40 miles before looping back around and ending about 5 miles from the entrance. The group intended to go about 5 miles, where they would camp at the base of the mountains at an established site. Along the way, they passed a group of tourists. They reported nothing unusual. The boys were in good spirits, following along and chattering noisily. One of them, a boy we later determined to be an 8-year-old named Peter Connolly, waved hello as he passed. The tourists waved back. As the group made their way up the trail, they stopped frequently to identify the plants and trees. During one of these stops, the boys began a pine cone war, which a passing hiker became involved in. The game ended when a younger boy, we aren't sure which, suddenly began to cry, and a ceasefire was called. The hiker said the boy didn't appear to be injured, rather he seemed to be frightened of something up in the trees, something he kept pointing at. The hiker didn't see anything, and he moved on. The group stayed for a little longer before moving on. Further up the trail, a candy bar wrapper was discovered impaled on a branch. We aren't sure who put it there, but one of the boys' mothers told us that it was her son's favourite brand. He really likes them. I keep them in a drawer so he can have one after school. You can't find them here. You have to go to Denali's up in Bridgeport. They have them. They know he likes them. She began to cry, so we ended the interview. We kept the wrapper initially as evidence, but it has since been given back to her. When we interviewed her, it was being kept on the fridge, with the boy's picture on it. She did not allow us to photograph it for the record. The boys reached the campsite around 1. One other family was present, but did not intend to stay the night. They had been there for a few days and were packing up as the scouts were settling in. The family, a father and his 2 daughters, made small talk with the boys and the scoutmasters. Oh, it was fun. They were running around. I had the girls help set up the tents. He looked out back. Before the interview, he had sent his 2 young daughters outside. I mean, it was fine. They were fine. We've been up there a million times. They got set up and I was talking with Howard Huxton. We corrected him. Huxley. We were talking and he said something about, did I know any good swimming places? But you know that time of year, it's so cold. Told him that. And he said that's fine, and then we just sort of talked for a little longer. And then me and the girls headed out. Nothing bad or anything. They just wanted to go swimming. Have some fun. From this point, we don't have an official record of what the group did. We know, based on what was left behind, that the tents were put up and a fire started. Sticks were found with blackened tips, so at least a few of the boys roasted things in the fire. Logs were set up, and there were scuff marks in the dirt where the boys rested their feet. Someone tossed their cap up in a tree, and it was still there when the search party arrived. They probably intended to retrieve it on the way out. The boys sat around the fire and told stories. They roasted things, and the scoutmasters smoked cigarettes and drank at least 4 beers. The cans were found outside the camp. Again, we believe they intended to retrieve them later. A trail through the bush led us to believe that at least some of the boys went to a clearing and looked at the stars. They are remarkably clear out there. The boys went to bed. The scoutmasters stayed up for a while longer to make sure everyone was asleep. At some point, they went to bed too, and the camp became quiet. There is again no official account of what happened next. All we know for sure is that at some point the camp was packed and the group moved on. Nothing save for the articles mentioned were left behind. The group moved west, further up the trail, and it is believed that they were headed for the swimming area. All of the boys' mothers confirmed that their children took swimming equipment. All of them knew how to swim. Whether they actually went, of course, we aren't sure. But we can imagine the group winding up the trail, the boys in a line talking to each other, singing songs. The boys would be looking forward to swimming, to spending another night out in the woods. Their spirits would have been high. They would have eaten a good breakfast of eggs and hot dogs, which makes it all the more heartbreaking that at some point along the trail on June 22nd, all 20 people in the group disappeared. The group was due back that afternoon. Parents began arriving around 3, and when the group still hadn't shown up by 5, a few of them decided to hike a ways up the trail to see what had delayed them. After hiking almost 3 miles and seeing no sign of them, they realized something was wrong, and they hurried back to the entrance. The call came in at approximately 6. By 7, the park was swarming with police and search and rescue. Those of us in town were quick to learn about it. Word travels fast, and the hysteria that came along with it was almost intoxicating. Within minutes, it seems, the town was full of police, park rangers from neighbouring counties, search teams, German shepherds on leashes being led to the entrance, their noses to the ground. The search itself was massive and encompassed tens of miles of the park, much further than anyone was realistically expected to have travelled. Dogs were taken out, given multiple scents to work with in all directions. There was certainly no lack of effort that could explain why nothing and no one has ever been found. In an almost grotesque move, all 18 sets of parents were brought before the cameras in a huge, miserable group. They were given turns to give their children messages, to plead with their imagined captors, to offer rewards, to offer forgiveness. For weeks, the population in town doubled. Many families, including ours, offered room and board to the volunteers flooding in at an incredible rate. Eventually, it made national news. Every tree in town wore a yellow ribbon. And as time went on and the search turned up nothing, people began to leave. They went back home to their real lives, and as incredible as it seems, the boys were largely forgotten. A quiet rumour began to spread that the group had drowned in the lake, although no one had been found in it. For a long time, people talked about the pit at the bottom of that lake, which went deep into the earth and contained more than those 20 bodies. The rumour persisted, was used to justify the removal of the yellow ribbons, the signs on telephone poles screaming, "Bring our babies home," the whole bit. On August 15th, the chief of police gave a televised speech insisting that the case was still open and being investigated. But despite the severity of the crime, the nation moved on. Donations dried up, searches couldn't be afforded, the lake was closed. The yellow ribbons vanished. On June 21st, 1996, local emergency services received a call from a terrified woman who claimed there was something in her backyard. No transcript exists of any of the calls made that evening, but through many interviews we have been able to piece most of them together. The first call from the terrified woman was placed at approximately 8 in the evening. According to the officer who took it, the woman claimed that someone had defaced one of the trees in her backyard. She could not explain how they had done it, or who it might have been, but as she described it, one of the trees in her yard now had a face. The face, she said, was screaming and begging her to come outside and help it. She wanted the awful thing removed immediately. An officer was dispatched, went to the scene, found nothing. The woman could not explain where the face had gone. 2 hours later, calls began to pour in from all over town. As we later discovered, the calls were placed from homes that all bordered or were located in the woods. An elderly man called to complain about 2 boys who were playing some sort of game at the edge of his property. The boys, he explained, had crammed themselves into one shirt and were playing at being conjoined in some awful fashion. Their screaming woke his wife, who was gravely ill, and he wanted to press charges. 2 blocks down, a young single mother reported seeing a very young boy running at the edge of the trees, but that he never seemed to move. He simply ran in place, his arms pumping, his face wet with tears. She looked him in the eye, and as if by magic, he disappeared. 1 mile away, on a property located within the forest, a hunter reported seeing a boy walking upside down through the air, almost 20 feet off the ground, carrying his own spine in his arms like a baby. All across town, strange noises were heard. Muffled conversations, screaming, crying. A name was heard which was later connected to one of the missing boys. A woman reported a strange, repetitive sound that she likened to the sound a chainsaw makes when it strikes rock. It woke her 2 children and frightened them badly enough that she bundled them up in her car and drove to her mother's house a county away. And still, the calls poured in. Well into the small hours of the night, people reported seeing horrible things. One man, a notorious drunk, called in stone sober to report having seen the head of a young boy emerging from the ground, the mouth a distorted, elongated scream of terror. As the head rose from the ground, the jaw did not end, but stretched like taffy until the whole affair was more than double his height. He shut all the blinds tightly and drank himself into a coma. He has since died, and we cannot confirm his story. All over town, on the anniversary of the disappearance of those 20 souls, the strange apparitions were seen, heard, in some cases, felt. A teenage girl walked in the woods with her boyfriend on a late-night date. They stumbled over something. Upon closer inspection, she determined that what she had tripped over was not in fact a bush, but the top of someone's head. When it moved under her fingers, she and the young man fled into the night, terrified beyond reason. As the sun began to rise, the calls dwindled and then they stopped. Despite the entire town having heard and seen the strange apparitions, the incident was not discussed in any media or even between the people themselves. However, an exodus of the town soon followed. Many of the 18 families moved away, never to be seen again. They left quickly and with no fuss. They simply packed their things, took their remaining children, and fled in the night, leaving behind empty houses and rooms painted blue or yellow or green. We did not pursue them. The town, desperate to move on, willfully forgot those yellow figures, those painted rooms. When the houses still stand, they remain empty. Squatters do not live there. The rooms are bare. The houses stand like physical memories. There is constant talk of demolition, but nothing ever comes of it. The 20 people lost on June 21st, 1995 have never been found. Last one, folks, I promise, and it's not as bad as that. Yeah, that's a lot.
That one was a lot.
Molten by Kerry, Hammond. Content warning, body horror. You see my eyes? Okay. A very good friend of mine has a young daughter that she's raising on her own. They live about a mile from me, so I see them a fair amount. I'm not really fond of kids, which I think I mentioned before, but this one's pretty alright. She's about 5, and she's really taken a shine to me for some reason, so she stays over sometimes. Gives her mom a bit of a break to do other things. A few months ago, she came over to spend a few days with me. Mom was going out of town on a little mini vacation, and I offered to take Ash. She shows up with his big backpack and sleeping bag in a little indoor tent. She said she wanted to camp in the living room. Now, her mom is also a ranger, so Ash knows a lot about the outdoors. She was going through a camping obsession, and she knew I'd indulge her. We spent most of the afternoon out on the trails behind the house, her pointing at everything and talking at me non-stop, and me holding the field guide she brought, just in case. We had dinner, we watched a documentary, I set up the tent for her in the middle of the room. She conked out relatively early, so I went into the bedroom to work for a while. Around 2, I heard the tent zipper, and I figured she was going to the bathroom, but she took a left and stood in the doorway. I asked her what was up, and she shuffled over to climb on my lap, which kind of startled me. Ash isn't an especially physical kid. She doesn't like hugs or kisses, and she'd never gotten on my lap before. I waited for her to tell me what was going on, and her face was puffy, and there was a feather stuck in her hair. "I can't sleep," she mumbled. "Why?" I said. She looked over at the door and sighed, leaned her head against me. "That shiny man." "Shiny man," I repeated. "He's noisy, and he's bright. The light's in my eyes, he's too noisy." I thought about that while she fell asleep. I brought her back to the living room and manoeuvred her back in the tent without waking her up. Didn't see anything strange, so I went to bed. Figured she'd had a weird dream. About a month later, she came to spend the night again, but she didn't bring her tent, so I put her in the bedroom like usual. We'd had a long day, and as soon as she was asleep, I got set up on the couch and passed out, and at some point, she shook me awake. I woke up and turned over. I need a blanket, please, she said. Cold? I sat up. He wants one. I stood up and turned on the light. Who does? That shiny man. He's cold. I took her hand and we went back into the bedroom. I didn't see anything, but she kept talking about a blanket, so I got one from the closet. I wasn't really listening until she went to the blanket. She grabbed the blanket and she ran to the window. She held it up and put her nose right on the glass. Here, she said. Now he'll stop crying. I could feel this strange kind of unease building. This was not right. I went to the window and nudged her aside so I could look out. Where is he? I asked. I didn't see anything. Oh, he went back, but he'll come down again, Ash said. I only half heard her. Is he a friend? She shook her head hard enough to make her hair fly. No. Is he Mom's? Ash's father had been stalking her mother for years, and he's tried to manipulate Ash before, promising her toys if she says bad things about her mom, that sort of thing. I was starting to wonder if he was the man, trying to get her to open the window so he could snatch her. I pulled the blinds shut and got down so I could talk to her seriously, eye to eye. Is it her friend? I asked again, but she shook her head. No. Does he want you to go outside? I was listening for any kind of noise, watching for the motion-activated lights to go off. He's cold, she said. Is he old? Or is he like me? I tried. She shook her head. I don't know. His face is all melty. Melty. It got melted one side. Now it's melty and shiny. He's cold. He won't let me sleep, so we have to give him that blanket, okay? I don't understand. What's shiny? I said. She took off toward the kitchen, and I followed. She was going through one of the drawers and talking about how he was a sad man, and she felt bad that he was cold. I heard a metallic wobbling, and she stood up with a piece of tinfoil. She pulled one side of her face down with her hand, turning her lower eyelid out and yanking her mouth into an unsettling grimace. Then she pressed the tinfoil against her skin. Like that, she explained, but it's watery, and sometimes he spits it out. She stood there with half her face pressed to the tinfoil, and I had no idea what to say except to ask the obvious. Where does he come from? She dropped the foil and went to the bedroom. She pressed her nose against the window again. He comes down. Down from there. She pointed to the tree line. And he was window. And he was, I'm cold, but he's all steaming and shiny. We both looked out in the window, but the yard was empty. She yawned hugely and got back in the bed and closed her eyes. The blanket's going to get all shiny too. Within seconds, she was asleep again. I watched and listened for a while, but nothing came to the window. She went home the next morning, and I didn't tell her mom about anything. I needed time to piece things together. That was a mistake, because once they were connected, I could not take them apart. The man who came to her window was covered in molten metal. He came from the trees and walked to the window where he stood and told her that he was cold. So cold. Molten metal, I've learned, destroys the nerves, incinerates them on contact. What's left is shock, the sensation of intense, unbearable cold, and a small eternity before the water in your body explodes outwards and the flesh evaporates in a cloud of vapor. Ash still comes over. The shiny man still visits. I'm a heavy sleeper, but lately I've taken to wearing earplugs at night when I'm alone. And we are officially out of the woods.